Okay. So apparently I screwed up and I copied over a video and I sent you the same video twice. Okay, so I'll see if we can clean this up. So the video that you're missing is this one, is the first part of manslaughter. So it's not going to be a smooth transition from this video to which would be number 8, but we'll give it our best shot. So manslaughter, manslaughter is the killing of a human being without malice. Now, manslaughter, we have to talk about murder with manslaughter because you can have an intent to kill and yet it not be murder. It can be manslaughter. The reason we have the crime of manslaughter is because as a society we recognize that there are those situations where we as a society are not willing to punish you the same way as we would for murder because of a unique set of circumstances. And there's generally two areas that we as a society consider to be unique. So the first one is another way to put it. A defendant commits all the elements of murder. So you look at this, when you first look at the facts, you're saying, oh yeah, there's malice. There's an intent to kill, an intent to cause great bodily injury, but maybe only be convicted of voluntary manslaughter if the conditions exist at the time the person acted. In other words, when they're committing the crime, which would negate or remove the element of manslaughter. I'm sorry, of malice. Okay. So a killing that would otherwise be murder is reduced to voluntary manslaughter if the defendant killed someone because of a sudden quarrel or heat of passion. The defendant killed someone because of a sudden quarrel or heat of passion if the defendant was provoked. So the mistake that students make when they see this definition is they say, oh, if I'm angry and I kill somebody, it's manslaughter, and if I'm not angry, it's murder. And that's incorrect. So when we talk about heat of passion, we're talking about this first definition up here at the top. We're talking about this right here. As a result of the provocation, the defendant acted rashly, meaning without reflection, without thinking, and under the influence of intense emotion that obscured his or her reasoning or judgment. So what they're saying is that this has to be the kind of event that would draw a reasonable person, okay? So this is a reasonable person standard. It's not what the defendant thought, it's what a reasonable person would do or thought if they were placed in this situation. Another way to say it is ask yourself, okay, am I capable of killing somebody? And really reflect on that. The idea of taking a life is a very thought-provoking idea that we all talk about, but we really don't really sit down and ask the question. And for each of us, we all have that point in time where we would be willing to kill somebody to take a life. But for each of us, it would be, a different set of circumstances. So it's more than I'm angry. It has to be the kind of event where a reasonable person would go to that place where they wouldn't care anymore. For instance, if you're a parent and your child is being harmed by somebody, you're not going to think twice. As a parent, you're going to be driven by the idea that your child's being hurt. You're not going to think about the consequences. You're not going to take the time to reason things out and to say, okay, well, I could call the police and I'll wait here, until the police get here. So if I'm in a car accident and somebody's drunk, That's going to make me angry, but it's not going to drive a reasonable person to the place where they're going to want to kill somebody because they were in a car accident and the person was driving drunk. If a person comes home and they find their spouse in the arms of someone else, that could be the kind of event where somebody's not going to stop and think. They may be so hurt, so angered, that feeling of betrayal would be so great that they wouldn't stop and reflect. They would reach out and possibly want to kill either one or both of the individuals in the room. So, what I really want you to get from this is that it's not about being angry. It's about an event that is so life changing that it would move a reasonable person, and that's the key, a reasonable person to take a life. Um, and so the life experiences for that type of event are going to be very limited. So if I'm in a bar and somebody says something rude to me, says that I'm too fat or I'm ugly or whatever the comment is that would be considered rude by anybody, that's not enough for me to kill someone and say, well, it's manslaughter, it's not murder. No. If somebody said that I'm too fat and I'm sitting in a bar or I'm ugly and then I take a knife and I stab them, that's murder. Because it's not the type of event that would drive a reasonable person to want to kill. So you have to ask, so you can see the second half of here, it says rashly and without due deliberation, meaning this is the kind of event that would cause somebody to not think about what they were doing. They're just simply going to react. And so it has to be more than simply, what I don't want to see is somebody say, well, she's angry, therefore it's voluntary manslaughter. No, it has to be that very unique event. And it's not whether this person's angry, it's whether a reasonable person in the same situation would respond by simply throwing caution to the wind and wanting to take a life, because that's a very serious event, taking of a life. All right. So there's no malice aforethought if the killing occurred upon sudden quarrel or heat of passion. So if, excuse me, so it talks about, let me go back one step. So here it says due deliberation, right? So when you first see that, you may say to yourself, well, due deliberation means that I'm going to stop and I'm going to really think about what happened. Do deliberate when you're thinking about somebody taking the time to reflect or think about what they're going to do. It doesn't if you think about it, when all of us have in our heads at one point we decide we may do something, but then we stop and we don't do it. And it's like that, well, if I do it, these are the consequences. Or it's just a feeling of, nah, I better not do it. This is, something bad's going to happen if I do this. Or the person that's that's going to respond to this is not going to respond in a very pleasant way. And so that time to reflect is really not a lot of time. It can be a very, very quick time. So if someone says something to me in a bar, the idea that I didn't have time to think really doesn't fly if you take that definition of due deliberation, meaning if somebody says something to me offensive, it should only take a split second for me to say, okay, this is not the type of statement that would want that a reasonable person, that I would want to kill somebody over it. We talk, I think, because we see in television and movies that the idea of taking a life is so cavalier. It's so easy. It's constantly. I mean, that's part of the movie experience is, people responding in a violent way. But in real life, we take that taking of a life much more seriously. All right. So, sudden quarrel, heat of passion means that it has to be more than just I'm angry. It has to be that kind of life-changing event where a reasonable person would not think about the consequences and go forward and take a life. So, and then the other part is in the actual but unreasonable belief, the necessity to defend oneself. Let me go one step further before we go there. Let's talk about a couple things about heat of passion. Um, with heat of passion, you have to act in the moment. In other words, the event has to be what drives you. So if there's a cooling off period, so let's say that my wife divorces me, comes home one day and says, I want a divorce. Oh, and by the way, I'm sleeping with the neighbor or I'm sleeping with the gardener and he's the best thing that ever happened to me. And she goes on and on and on, tells me all these horrible things about our marriage. And now we're in the process of a divorce and it's 6 months later. And after 6 months, I take a gun and I kill my wife. Well, I've had 6 months to reflect on the situation. So there is a cooling off period where I'm no longer responding to the event itself. I've had time to deliberate and reflect and think and talk to others and share my experience and talk to, seek counseling, all those things. So a cooling off period is not defined by any particular period of time. It doesn't say, if it happens, if there's a break of 2 weeks or 10 days. A cooling off period could be a day, it could be 10 days, it could be 6 months. It just depends on the severity of the event. Um, but always look for a cooling off period. If there's a break in time between when the event happens and when this shocking event happens and when somebody decides to take a life, you want to stop and reflect and ask yourself, okay, was there a cooling off period? And did somebody have the time to reflect and think about what the outcome would be or what could happen if they take a life? So it's an objective standard. Like how much time would a reasonable person take to cool off? So in order to be found guilty of manslaughter, the act of taking a life has to be under the direct and immediate influence of the quarrel or heat of passion. Okay, it's measured by the duration of time it would take the average or ordinary reasonable person to cool off. All right. So heat of passion like I said, it's an objective standard. It's like what a reasonable person would do, not what this person. It's not about what this person did. It's about what a reasonable person would do. So, like it says here, it says ordinarily reasonable person. And then I gave you some examples of different um, cases that actually went through the court systems where the court said, yes, this was voluntary manslaughter and not murder. So you have an idea of what real life experiences are where the court found voluntary manslaughter. And so let me go. So now that's involuntary. Um, Okay, so the other piece of this, I need to go back here for a second. The other piece of this, sorry for moving around so much. Where do I want to go? Here. So there's two different ways I mentioned. The first way is sudden quarrel or heat of passion. The second way is this unreasonable belief in the necessity to defend oneself or another person. So the key word there is unreasonable belief. It's not that you are found not guilty. You are still found guilty of a crime. It's just not murder. So if I get into a fist fight in a bar and I'm losing my fist fight, if I'm losing, it doesn't justify the fact that I take out a knife and stab you to death. That's still a crime. It's not an issue of self-defense because self-defense is a reasonable belief that you have to use um, force on somebody. Here, we're talking about unreasonable belief. So, factually, would a reasonable person have thought that their life was in danger and that they had to use deadly force? And if you say no, that your belief that this person's beliefs would be unreasonable, then you would go to voluntary manslaughter. So you may have the intent to stab somebody, you may have the intent to cause grievous bodily injury, but if you did it to defend yourself, and that was based on an unreasonable belief, then it becomes manslaughter and you simply get rid of murder. All right, again, I apologize for the confusion. I'm going to post this right away, send it out in an email, and again, send it out so you get this today. Today is Friday. So, all right, we'll